Utilizing the reference image once more on its own layer and applying that posterize effect, we now begin to develop some of the detail in the painting. I'm going to turn off the visibility so we can see where we've come from this point on. As you start developing detail in the painting, I want you to give the foreground the preference more than you would the background here. Don't paint the whole landscape to the same degree of detail. Paint less detail in the background and of the landscape and give more detail in the foreground area. It's less important there and gives more authority to what's in the foreground. The difference in detail also helps draw the viewer's eye into the main focus of the landscape painting. So don't think that because you've painted a particular landscape once, you've done it and that's it. You may find that you want to repeat this a couple of times to where you really feel and start feeling comfortable with the shapes and the building of the detail that you have going on in the painting. With this particular image here, we have some indication of what time of day it is, but a lot of it is just going to come from our natural instincts of what we feel is right for the particular painting. Develop your background, middle ground, and foreground areas, and consider some of the elements that are important as you begin developing your painting, and especially your landscape paintings. Keep in mind that you want to have a strong center of interest. Flip that image every once in a while to give you a different perspective on it. The strongest color, if possible, should be complementary colors. Complementary colors are red and green, blue and orange, yellow and purple or violet. Have a strong shift in contrast between light and dark and vice versa. In the example that we're beginning to work on here, you'll see that the uprights or the trees will have the darkest value in contrast with the rest of the composition. Your center of interest it's not essential, but it should take up a good portion of the picture plane and gradually become subdued while withdrawing. The subordinate and surrounding elements should direct or lead the viewer to the center of interest by means of pointers and visual paths. Now, what I mean by that is, let's take a look at this by opening up the reference again. We had talked about this being the focal point of the image, and you can see that it's beautifully enhanced by the fact that the trees have this curving in. This road in particular is a very strong visual indicator to the center of interest. Just naturally, we see some beautiful elements that are taking place naturally in this photograph to enhance the center of interest, from the path to the shadows of the trees and to the beautiful arching branches that we see in the trees. I also want to talk a little bit about where your center of interest should be placed. A lot of times I like to use the layout grid, and I'm going to enable it at this point. And you can see that the layout grid is based upon the rule of thirds. And for the most part, you want to keep your center of interest out of the center and off to one third or off in this block or over in this block. And here you can see that the center of interest is not located in the center. It's just off to the right. And giving us a nice area to work with on the center of interest there. An effective an effectively designed center of interest will grasp and hold the viewer's attention. So work on that. If you don't have a well-defined center of interest in your painting, try and develop it. Create at least 3 planes, and we've talked about that: the foreground, middle ground, and background. And at that point, we're going to go on and just develop more of the detail in the painting. At this point, I would probably feel pretty comfortable about what I have in at this point, and probably go ahead and drop this part of the painting to the canvas layer. And I'm going to go ahead and select these particular layers and go ahead and drop those by holding down the shift key. And now you can see that those layers are now on the canvas, and I'm going to move into working now with the Sargent brush. And the Sargent brush is one of my favorite brushes to work with snow in particular. And I'm going to probably go ahead and lift this canvas area again to its own layer and change it to gel composite method. So again, I can refer back to it. I still can open up this the reference image, which was on the top, which is based upon the posterize effect, and I can still do that. And I think that's probably where I'll end up. I'll just keep that locked and work on this layer and open and close it as I go forward here. So let's go ahead and begin working in the background and start developing this. Now it's time to again to start thinking about the colors that we're going to use. And I may work with just a very, very pale blue in the background for the sky here. And don't feel like you're going ahead, you're going to try this, it's going to work. Remember, you can paint over it using the Sargent brush too. It's a great brush to just experiment with, to get started with. Close that layer up. And work with a little bit bigger brush here. And this may be a little bit blue for what I'm trying to depict. But again, we're going to start with blocking in that color again. And I'm painting right over what I worked on before. But that was part of the exercise, so you can just learn to block things in. And I'm going to take that blue right down to the edge. Getting the sky blocked in here. Brushes I use are the Sargent brush, and that was just to block in the basic color here. I added a little darker value up towards the top of the area, keeping the lighter values at the horizon, where most of the light is going to reflect, or your largest or your most prominent light source is going to be. And then I do like one of my favorite blending brushes, and I'm going to bring that up here, is the oil brush blender from the Dens brushes, and I'll pull that out onto my custom palette here as well. If you don't have Dens oil brushes, let me know, and I'll be happy to let you know where you can obtain those brushes. I like the jitter set a little bit high on this brush when I'm using it to blend, because I do like the effect that it can give you for creating some clouds in the background, or give you kind of the indication of the shape of clouds, something like that. Then we're going to go ahead with the Sargent brush again, and we're going to again start moving in to the next shape. We're working from back to forward. I don't think there's any problem with you working forward to back, whatever you feel most comfortable with. And again, I'm just going to take this color And using that Sargent brush, I'm just going to give this kind of the just break up this area a little bit. I may even add a little jitter to this brush here. And again, we're going right over that shape that we created. Take a look at the value color that we've got going here. What color did we choose to work with? We're going light to a little bit darker. And I'm going to extend that right over into this area as well. You could take that oil brush blender and just soften that edge a little bit, or use it to scrumble up the edge a bit, just to soften it down. I don't like, I don't tend to like too much of that square look, so don't let it get too digital looking. Keep it very painterly. Now we're going to move into our lightest value area, which is going to be the snow. So depending upon what brush or what color you're going to be working with, you can again start painting right into that big snow area, which is a very large shape. And now I'm also going to work with the actual direction of those strokes as well. I know that this is kind of a sloping hill here, so my brush strokes are going to be kind of more on a slope here. And again, I'm not worried about the Sargent brush picking up those colors because I can go over those colors again. It's not a problem. If you want to extend color a little bit, don't be shy about picking up colors where you see them. Sargent brush is wonderful for creating the different values of the snow and shape. This should be about where you're at. Notice the colors that we're using here. Probably I'm going to get a little bit away from this purple here as I start to pick up and develop the shape of the road here. Because in the original it is, snow covered. So it's going to have darker values mixed into it, but it's not going to be quite as light as the surrounding snow. Okay, so you can see now that we've got some very basic shapes put in. Again, you've learned a little bit about building those shapes. Now we're going over those shapes once again with the paint that we're going to be ending up using in the painting to develop the final image. And now it's time to start thinking a little bit about detail and building the detail into the painting. I'm going to continue working with the Sargent brush. I'm going to start incorporating the tree trunks into the painting. I'm going to develop the shadows, which I think are very, very important to this painting. And when I'm finished with this, I'll basically show you where the steps I took and how I achieved the final look. So again, if you're ready at any point to take a look at your image, maybe on a different plane, as long as you have the image on the canvas layer, you can go to Edit, Flip Horizontal, and take a look and see how the image reads flipped on the horizontal as well. And you can see that it's a very interesting way of looking at your image. It does give it a totally different appeal. So you may want to continue working with the image, but work with it in this fashion instead. Let's go ahead and flip it back. And we'll go ahead and work a little further on this. Treat these areas of shadow as no more than shapes. That's all they are. So again, visualize these shadowed areas as nothing more than shapes and fill them in accordingly. If you've left out some trees, remember that those shadows correspond to the tree that you have in your painting. So make sure that it reads well and correctly by making sure that there's a tree to actually cast the shadow. So don't get too far ahead where you're not thinking in that direction either as well. Again, just working with a Sargent brush and developing detail. Again, don't let your trees draw away from the focal point, but draw the eye into the focal point. And you're going to achieve that with this great path going this way, and also your tree branches leading the eye to that area. Okay, one of the things that you also might want to do here is develop some of the shadowed areas and to start incorporating some additional color. Now, you may find that working with the Sargent brush tends to get a little bit heavy in certain areas. So consider adding a new layer and changing that layer to gel composite method, and then picking up the soft airbrush. And by doing that, you can float in some very nice subtle color changes that will create some nice atmosphere in your painting as well. And you can do this just really nice and lightly. It's not overwhelming. It doesn't really distract heavily from the painting. And you can just develop some different color values by working with the airbrush. And this is the airbrush 40 from the airbrush category. Excuse me. So I'm just going to go ahead and work in and darken these values just a little bit in the background here. We do know that there's no foliage evident on these trees, so what's going to happen here is we're going to have lots of light coming through and penetrating into these areas. So you're not going to you're going to have some very strong shadows and a lot of great color that you can work with in this your final painting, if you end up using this image to work with. You're going to have your own issues that you're going to have to deal with based upon the image that you've chosen to work with. So I haven't really overdone the shadows here. I'm keeping them kind of on the light side, changing the values of them just a little bit in certain areas. I went a little too far on that stroke there. And we do know that we have lots of tree branches to deal with in this painting, and I think that's part of the beauty of this particular image as well. One of the brushes that I like using is the Zen Leaf brush. It's from David Gell's Zen watercolor brush category. And I like using that just very lightly. And I'm going to start, you'll notice that it adds a watercolor layer. And I'm going to use that to just enhance these little branches coming off from the trees, and kind of to fill in the space in this background area here. And because it's a little bit on the opaque side, transparent side, because it is a watercolor based, I think it's really a lovely brush to use to build these branches with. And I'll stop the video right now. And okay, so you can see that I've gone on to develop the image using the Zen leaf brush to develop those little branches and twigs that you see. And finally went again into another layer here and developed this background, darkening the value up just a little bit to show a little more depth here. And the final thing that I'm going to show you here is you could do this with the airbrush, or you can come over to your FX brushes and choose the glow brush. And this is the only really warm color that I'm going to choose here, but it's kind of a orangey red shade, kind of on the rust color here. And I'm going to select the glow brush. It's going to be pretty large size, and I'm going to go ahead and add a new layer here. And I'm just going to apply the glow brush just in this area where I feel maybe the sun is going down, and just to give it a little bit warmer appeal. And just let it run into this area and up maybe into the sky a little bit. As we go into the background, a lot of times we'll have a little more pinks and reds showing up in our colors. So as we go into the background, things tend to get a little bit redder the closer we get to that light source. And maybe just bring it up into the sky a little bit here. And I may just run it just here and there. To bring some added continuity of color there. There we go, something like that. So that's about it. I'm not going to go any further with this image. Know when to stop, know when you're finished, and let it go. In conclusion here, what I'd like you to do is begin with that blocking in those shapes based upon your original reference image, and get those shapes in nice and strong. Do this a couple of times so you become familiar with it. Every time you do it, you're going to see those shapes take on different looks. Every time you do it, you're going to get smarter about the shapes that you develop in your painting. And even though the painting's complete here, we still have very strong planes, foreground, middle ground, background. We also have very strong shapes that we can actually see when we squint. So don't lose that as you continue to move into more detail and creating more detail in your painting. Post your finished painting and tell me how you related to painting this way. Was it a positive experience for you? Did it help you? Did it help you to the point where you feel like this is a very strong skill to incorporate into your painting procedures and your techniques? And let me know your feelings on that. So again, get started, and any questions, feel free to post. I look forward to seeing your work.